Okay, so we left off on page 200, nervous, and we know Ivan has been working on something that involves art. We don't know what. We know it has something to do with the zoo. We know he needed words. The word started off with H, and the word turned out to be home. So could he write a word, and what's he going to do with all these papers, and how's he going to get help? So prediction time. Like, what is his plan? Let's find out if his plan works. All day long, I knuckle walk circles around my cage. Which reminds me, we have to knuckle walk here pretty soon. I'm so nervous I can't nap. I can't even eat. Well, not very much anyway. I'm ready to show Julia what I've made. Julia. It has to be Julia. She's an artist. Surely she'll truly look at my painting. She won't notice the smudges and tears. She won't care if the pieces don't quite fit together. She'll see past all of that. Surely Julia will see what I've imagined. I watch Ruby trudge sullenly through the 4 o'clock show, and I wonder, what will happen if I fail? What if I can't make Julia understand? But of course, I know the answer. Nothing. Nothing will happen. Ruby will remain the main attraction at the Exit 8 Big Top Mall and Video Arcade, conveniently located off I-95, with shows at 2, 4, and 7, 365 days a year, year after year after year. Mood. What do you think that Katherine Applegate is trying to make you feel when she makes Ivan say 365 days a year after year after year? Definitely makes me feel something. Interesting fact, this book has several characters named after my family. Julia is my niece. There is Maggie, who I think she was the seal. And Snickers was named after a dog that I used to have. I think there's one more, but I can't remember. I'll have to go back and look. There's 4, so somebody else as well. Showing Julia, here we go. It's time to show my work. The mall is silent except for Thelma the macaw, who is practicing a new phrase. Uh-oh! Julia is finishing. My kids are sitting right over there. I'd have you wave at them and it would be weird. Julia is finishing her homework. George is sweeping outside. Mac has gone home for the night. I grab Knot Tag and carefully pull out the folded papers. So many paintings, page after page, piece after piece of my giant puzzle. I pound on my glass and Julia glances over. Fingers trembling, I hold up one of my paintings. It's brown and green, a corner piece. Julia smiles. I display another picture, and then another, and another, and another, each one a tiny part of the whole. Julia looks confused. But what is it? She asks. She shrugs. It doesn't matter. It's pretty just as it is. Uh-oh, says Thelma. No, I think. No, it does matter. More paintings. George calls out to Julia. He's done for the night. Grab your backpack, he says, and hurry, it's late. Gotta go, Ivan, Julia says. Julia doesn't understand. I have to find the right pieces. I dig through the pile. Here they are, somewhere. They're here somewhere. I know they are. I find one, another. I try to hold 4 of them up against the glass. Bob, I say, help me, hurry. Bob grabs paintings with his teeth and drags them to me. One by one, I shove pictures through the window crack. They crumble and tear. There are too many pieces. My puzzle is too big. Careful, Ivan, Julia says. Those might be worth millions someday. You never know. She arranges the paintings into a neat stack. I suppose Mac's going to want to sell these in the gift shop. She still doesn't understand. I shove more out the hole, and more, all of them, one after another. So Ivan's been painting, has he? George says as he puts on his coat. A lot, says Julia with a laugh. A whole lot. You're not taking all those home with you, are you? George asks. I mean, no offense to Ivan, but they're just blobs. Julia thumbs through the towering stack of paintings. They might not be blobs to Ivan. Let's leave those by the office, George suggests. Mac will want to try selling them. Although why anyone would pay $40 for a finger painting a 2-year-old could do, I don't know. I like Ivan's work, Julia says. He puts his feelings into them. He puts his hair into them, George says. Julia waves goodbye. Night, Ivan. Night, Bob. I press my nose against the glass and watch her walk away. All my work, all my planning wasted. I look at Ruby, sleeping soundly, and suddenly I know she'll never leave the Big Top Mall. She'll be here forever, just like Stella. That's the other name, Stella. I can't let Ruby be another one and only. Page 207. Chest beating. Often, when visitors come to see me, they beat their hands against their puny chests, pretending to be me. They pound away, soundless as the wet wings of a new butterfly. The chest beating of a mad gorilla is not something you ever want to hear, not even if you're wearing earplugs. Not even if you're 3 miles away wearing earplugs. A real chest beating sends the whole jungle running, as if the sky has broken open, as if men with guns are near. It's interesting that he uses that metaphor to describe the sound of chest beating. Why do you think there's a chapter called chest beating? Page 208. Angry. Thump! The sound, my sound, echoes through the mall. George and Julia spin around. Julia drops her backpack. George drops his keys. The pile of pictures goes flying. Thump, thump, thump. By the way, when you hear the word thump, it is a lit term. What lit term is it? I bounce off the walls. I screech and bellow. I beat and beat and beat my chest. Bob hides under knot tag, his paws over his ears. I'm angry at last. I have someone to protect. Just like his dad used to when he was the silverback. Page 209. Puzzle pieces. After a long while, I grow quiet. I sit. It's hard work being angry. Julia looks at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I'm panting. I'm a little out of shape. What the heck was that? George demands. Something's really wrong, Julia says. I've never seen Ivan act this way. He seems to be calming down, thank goodness, George says. Julia shakes her head. He's still upset, Dad. Look at his eyes. My pictures are scattered all over the floor like huge autumn leaves. Fantastic simile. What is being compared? My pictures are scattered all over the floor like huge autumn leaves. And why do you think he chooses autumn leaves? What a mess, George says, sighing. Wish I hadn't bothered sweeping tonight. Do you think Ivan's okay? Julia asks. Probably just a temper tantrum, George says. He reaches under a chair to retrieve a brown and red picture. Can't say I blame the guy, stuck in that tiny cage all these years. Julia starts to answer, but then she freezes. She cocks her head. She stares at her feet, where my pictures lie in disarray. Dad, she whispers, come see this. I'm sure he's another Rembrandt, George says. Let's pick these up and get going, Jules. I'm exhausted. Dad, she says again. Seriously, look at this. George follows her gaze. I see blobs. Many, many blobs, along with the occasional swirl. Please, can we go home now? That's an H, Dad. Julia kneels down, straightening one picture, then another. That's an H, and here? She grabs more pictures. Put this one here, and, I don't know, maybe that one? You have an E. George rubs his eyes. I hold my breath. Julia is running now. She picks up one picture, sets down another. It's like a puzzle, Dad. This is something. It's a word, maybe words, and a picture of something, a giant picture. Jules, George says, this is crazy. But he's looking at the floor too, wandering from picture to picture and scratching his head. H, Julia says, E, O. Ho? Julia chews her lower lip. H, E, O. And that looks a lot like an I. H, E, O, I? George writes in the air with his finger. I, E, O, H? Not the letter, an actual I. And that's a foot, or maybe a tree, and a trunk. Dad, I think that's a trunk. Julie runs to my window. Ivan, she whispers, what did you make? I stare back. I cross my arms. This is taking much longer than I thought it would. Humans. Sometimes they make chimps look smart. Finally, page 214. Julia and George take the pictures to the ring where there's room to see them all. An hour passes as they try to assemble my puzzle. Ruby's awake now, and she and Bob and I watch. Ivan, Ruby says, is that a picture of me? Yes, I say proudly. Where am I supposed to be? That's a zoo, Ruby. See the walls and the grass and the people looking at you? Ruby squints. Who are all those other elephants? You haven't met them, I say. Yet. It's a very nice zoo, Ruby says with an approving nod. Bob nudges me with his cold nose. It is indeed. In the ring, Julia pumps her fist in the air. Yes, she cries. I told you, Dad. There it is. H-O-M-E. Home. George gazes at the letters. He spins around to look at me. Maybe it's just a coincidence, Jules. You know, a once in a trillion kind of thing. Like that old saying about the chimp and the typewriter. Give him long enough and he'll write a novel. I make a grumbling noise as if a chimp could write a letter, let alone a book. Then how do you explain the rest of it? Julia demands. The pictures of Ruby in the zoo. How do you know it's a zoo? George asks. See the circle on the gate? There's a red giraffe in it. George squints and tilts his head. Are you sure that's a giraffe? I was thinking more along the lines of a deformed cat. It's the logo for the zoo, Dad. It's on all their signs. Explain that. George gives her a helpless smile. I can't begin to. I'm just saying, there has to be a logical explanation. Look how big this is. Julia puts the last piece of Ruby's right ear into place. It's huge. It is definitely large, George agrees. Julia watches me. She chews on her thumbnail. I see the question in her eyes. She turns back to the paintings and stares at them, looking, truly looking. A slow smile dawns on Julia's face. Okay, so you have to imagine, this is realistic fiction, but of course we know it's fantasy. We know that Ivan can't talk to Bob, and Bob can't talk to Stella and to Ruby, and at least not the way that they're describing here. However, it is a real enough piece of fiction that, because we chimps can sign language, and there have been gorillas who have finger painted, and we'll get to that at the end of the book, and who even can write simple things. So this isn't too far-fetched, but you have to imagine, just get into the fantasy for a minute. Julia and George are sitting there, and they put together a painting with words that Ivan put together. A pretty amazing moment, right? So Julia's mind is clicking, because just because we've put it all together, now what? Because remember, Ivan's goal is to get Ruby to the zoo. How is this, even though they figured it out, going to get Ruby to the zoo? How are they going to figure that out? But Julia has a slow smile on her face. And I love this. The slow smile dawns on Julia's face. Sort of, if you think of dawn in the morning when the sun slowly rises, and you think of the smile slowly rising too, and that face lighting up. Dad, she says, I have an idea, a big idea. Julia races around the edge of my painting, her arms spread wide. Billboard big. There's a billboard, right? I'm not following you. I think this is meant to be on a billboard. That's what Ivan wants. George crosses his arms over his chest. What Ivan wants, he repeats slowly. And you know this because you two have been chatting. Because I'm an artist, and he's an artist. Uh-huh, says George. Julia clasps her hands together. Come on, Dad, I'm begging you. George shakes his head. No, I'm not doing that. No billboard, no way. I'll get the ladder, Julia says. You get the glue. I know it's dark out, but the billboard's lit. Mac will fire me, Jules, Julia considers. But think of the publicity, Dad. Everybody would know about Ruby. You want me to put up a sign that shows Ruby in a zoo with the word home on it in giant letters. George gestures towards my pictures. A sign, incidentally, that just happens to have been made by a gorilla. Exactly. And you want me to do it without Mac's permission? George asks. Exactly. No, George says. No way. Prediction time. Who's going to win this battle? Julia goes to the edge of the ring, careful not to step on any of my paintings. She picks up Mac's claw stick. She walks back and hands it to her father. George runs a finger along the blade. She's just a baby, Dad. Don't you want to help her? But how would it help, Jules? Even if lots of people see Ivan's sign, it doesn't mean anything's going to change. I'm not exactly sure yet. Julia shakes her head. Maybe people will see the sign, and they'll know this isn't where Ruby belongs. Maybe they'll want to help too. George sighs. He looks at Ruby. She waves her trunk. It's a matter of principle, Dad. Principal. George corrects. Dad, Julia says softly. What if Ruby ends up like Stella? George looks at me, at Ruby, at Julia. He drops the claw stick. The ladder, he says quietly, is in the storage locker. And we'll stop there. Really cool chapter where a daughter and her father do the right thing, or at least we think so. On to the next.